name's Henri, and as the guide says, apparently my name's Henri Helvetica, which it's not. It is my Twitter handle, though, but don't believe everything you see on the internet, please, because I'm just trying to have some fun. So essentially, I'm just going to jump right into it and start this talk. So I like to watch a lot of conference videos, read documentations and whatnot, and one day I was listening to a JavaScript engineer by the name of, oh my God, I know his Twitter handle, I always forget his actual name, Getify, Kyle Simpson, there we go. And he was asked about what he thought some of the issues were on the web, or just code generally, because again, he is a JavaScript engineer. And he said basically, the web's primarily being built by a group of people that take for granted things like unlimited and free bandwidth. And I'm like, absolutely true, because that does happen. But the biggest thing is like, of all the things he could talk about, this is what he chose to answer. And that was a little striking to me, because that was essentially some of the challenges that we talk about on the performance side. And I just wasn't expecting to hear that, so I was really glad to see that he said that specifically. And he went on and said that we've become drunk of all the features that we have available to us. And I said, ding, that's absolutely true as well. We have like frameworks plugin, retina screens, high-powered devices. We have it all. In fact, I like to say this: the front-end development suffers from the embarrassment of riches, curse of abundance, paradox of plenty. I like to write, can you tell? And this is absolutely true, because we end up with things like this quite often. You know, we're at home, we're developing, and we have great laptops, amazing ultra-wide monitors, SSD, RAM, huge caches. But we're creating experiences with these devices, but also for these devices. And we're not actually taking considerations what's happening outside of our little bubble. In fact, someone who's speaking tomorrow, Alex Russell from Google, once said this: your laptop is lying to you. And we're going to talk about that soon, and you'll see why. And lastly, Kyle Simpson went on and said this: we need to rethink how we, as crafters, that's us, make it more, as in the web, accessible to them, the users. Simply because he's someone who travels a lot, and he had realized that, you know, the web experience outside of, you know, the comforts of like North America was very challenging, and he wanted to convey that. And I thought, again, that was amazing. And in fact, I'm going to bring up another quote by a gentleman that I respect, Tim Kadalik, another engineer who speaks on performance. He mentioned that he thought it was cultural, meaning that people weren't really taking performance, it wasn't baked in culturally. And that's something that I hope once we leave today that you'll take into consideration. Now, I like to compare performance to food quite often. And does anyone know what this is? This is the ackee fruit from the ackee tree. A delicacy in the West Indies, specifically Jamaica, Caribbean. We eat this with like saltfish quite often. But here's the funny part. When this is not cooked properly, it's actually poisonous. But we eat it anyways. And what I'm going to talk about today is specifically images and image management. Images are awesome, but when they're mismanaged, it is a poisonous experience. See what I did there? All right. All right, so welcome to this cinematic event called the Hateful Weight. We're going to talk about page weight, image management, why it's important, and why essentially data management is very key in or for a worldly experience. Keep that in mind. I said worldly. Now, the Hateful Weight is a tragedy in 5 parts. We're going to talk about how we got here, the implications like user experience on mobile, because again, the emphasis is mobile, the money involved, and the networking. We're going to talk about the main characters involved, so image formats, new and old. We're going to talk about some solutions real quickly, and I'm going to end it with some resources. So let's start. How did we arrive here? Well, the story starts here in Buffalo, New York, which is actually close to Toronto, not close to here. And Buffalo, New York is responsible for this. 1974, this is the first digital camera. 0.01 megapixel, data was saved onto cassette. From click to data saved, 23 seconds. Imagine that. For scale, this is what it looked like. It was actually 8 pounds. And this is with the actual inventor. His name is Steve Sasson, worked at Kodak. Why am I bringing this up? Well, photography and digital photography then moved to this. 18 megapixel camera, 600 grams. You know, we walked around with it. But more specifically, we then went to a 12 megapixel phone in your back pocket, in your hand, in your purse, taking beautiful pictures, but these photos are making their way to the web and, to an extent, blowing the web up. Now, I don't know if there are any DJ Khaled fans here, but we're going to go through a major key alert, all right? The modern smartphone consumes a lot of data. This is like irrefutable. And in fact, if we look at some of the image data today that's being sent down the pipe, to the mobile phone, it pretty much mirrors what's happening to the desktop. So think about it. We're sending almost the same amount of image data to the smartphone that we are to the desktop, but they are two different devices with two different CPU strength, power. And this data is from HTTP archive, by the way. But let's get into some more details. In fact, the image data that we're sending to the smartphone is, how do I say, by 5. Pentupling, is that it? I don't know. I'm not the best at grammar, so pardon me. But we're sending image data 5 times faster to the mobile phone in the last few years that we have to the desktop. This is essentially a trend. Now, let's get a bit more granular. If we look at it on a per request basis, it's pretty much the same. Once again, we are sending the same amount of image data down to the phone that we are to the desktop, and that should not be. Let that sink in. So at the end of the day, we can comfortably say mobile pages are overweight. They're weighing down the user and the experience and crushing data plans, and that's something you want to keep in mind. Earlier today, there was talk about, you know, data being very expensive in certain markets. These are things you want to keep in mind, without a doubt. So let's talk about user experience, the implications. What are we after, ultimately, as developers? We're after creating fantastic user experiences. Not for us, but for our users. And obviously, for people who have been around sort of like performance talks and whatnot, this is a very well-known stat. The fact that 53% of your visitors will abandon a page that takes 3 seconds or more to load. I mean, 3 seconds is not a lot, but it's something you want to keep in mind. Now, that came from a double-click study. That same study went ahead and divulged this stat. 77% of pages load in 10 seconds or more, with the average page loading in 19 seconds. Now, 19 seconds may kind of, I don't know, it may not seem like a lot, but for reference, this is what 19 seconds is going to be like. We're halfway there. No, thank you. So you can imagine what the pain was like. That was 19 seconds, what the data basically given us. So, man, we're not doing it right. So let's talk about some of the costs involved. Some time back, Facebook, to sort of get a full idea of what it was like to develop for markets beyond North America, they were over, I believe, in Africa, and talking about the experience there, and they had written about it, and essentially saying that, you know, that data is extremely expensive in emerging markets, and purchasing more data is often a laborious process. That was from Facebook's information. Now, with that being said, apps like these came around. Does anyone know what this is? Okay, this is an app that Samsung released earlier this year, purchased off another browser vendor, but it's essentially a bit of a web proxy where you'll be able to manage your mobile data. It's called Samsung Max. You could look it up right now. You could download it right now, actually, if you wanted to. But these are the kind of things that are being employed overseas. And I'm saying overseas, but I'm going to make a case for even pockets of North America as well, where people don't have like the best plans. And in fact, to get a really good close look at what it's like worldly in terms of like connectivity, you can see, yes, there is some 4G, mostly North America, little parts of Europe, and obviously Asia as well. But for the most part, the world is a 3G and a 2G place. I don't know when the last time you were on 3 or 2G, but there's nothing gangster about that. As the kids say these days, it's not wavy. No one got that one. It's all good. But these are things you want to take in consideration when you're developing your app or web app, or for sure, when you're dealing with images, because once again, images, and I may not have mentioned this earlier, but images, for the most part, take up the majority of the weight of a page. And with that being said, it's the place you can make the majority of your savings as well. So speaking of these images, let's talk about these main characters, the villains in this tragedy. I'm a big fan of knowing your formats and what they're good at, what they're not. So essentially strengths and shortcomings. And I'm going to fly through this because a lot of this may not be, a lot of this, pardon me, isn't new, but it's a good little refresher. Let's start with the, say it together now, GIF. I'm sorry. I listen to the, Steve Wilhite, and I'm a grammar freak. Nonetheless, one of the older formats, unfortunately known for bloat. With that being older, it's an older codec. You can get some transparency out of it, not alpha, but just transparency. It's well supported, we all know that. But once again, known for bloat, people love it for its animation, so I get it. It's an antiquated format, but unfortunately it's one that's, for the moment, here to stay. But you have to know these things when you're handling the format itself, the file. Now the ping, a fantastic format there, well supported, actually was originally introduced to replace the GIF, but this one has actually alpha channel capabilities, meaning you can get like gradient transparency, phenomenal support again, very popular format, and you can use this one specifically for pictures, photography, and what I love about it, varying bit depths, where you can actually play around, and if you have an image, say, that has like less than 256 colors, you can get a particular ping version to use. Let's look at the SVG. Fantastic format here as well, well supported. The best part about the SVG is it compresses well, because it's actually not a raster format. But the challenge with this is it's really good for logos, some icons, a little bit of animation, not too many colors. Resolution independent, because essentially what you'll be able to do is, once again, when you're on mobile, you may not have to deal with retina, non-retina in the case of the SVG. And I say it's growing in popularity because right now, SVGs are being used like overall at 1 or 2%. So they really just have one direction to go, which is up. Now, let's look at a format that's not very well known. Raise your hands if you know what the WebP is. Okay, a few of you definitely. Fantastic. Now, you're not any smarter than anyone else. I'm just happy that you know. Just playing with you guys. But this is an important one, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. So, it's a Google technology, lossy and lossless, which is very important because depending on how you want to, well, depending on the resolution you want, and the quality that you're trying to put out, that's a very interesting option. Alpha channel as well. Does some animation, not the most encoding tools, but that's not a huge hurdle. Fantastic data savings, and we're going to see that in a minute, and we're going to talk about its promising future. Now, let's take a local hero like this dude right here. And I just grabbed this off the net, but originally it was about 1 meg as a JPEG. As a WebP, it came in around this size. So once again, it is very aggressive in its encoding, and it's something that you certainly want to keep in mind. And I mean, I'll be able to provide the slides afterwards, so you'll be able to look at some links and get some more information. Now, let's finish up with a JPEG. By far the most popular format on the internet. Probably about 40-some% of images online are JPEG alone. Introduced as a lossy format because they needed a format that was going to basically provide proper photography, but without the bloat that, say, the PNG was providing. Pristine support, definitely. And we have variants as well. JPEG 2000, which is what macOS uses or can use, and JPEG XR, something that Microsoft people can use over with Edge. Now, one thing about the JPEG, it contains EXIF data. Hands up if you know what EXIF data is. Awesome. For the rest of you, we're going to learn right now. Exchangeable image file format. All right, so it's a bit of metadata. Now, this is the obligatory like slide. Does anyone know where this picture was shot? $100. Yeah, I didn't think so. So, if we look at some of this EXIF data, which is metadata embedded inside of this digital image, eventually we'll be able to see these coordinates right here. And these coordinates will take you not too far from here, in fact, about 45 minutes in some neighborhood in San Jose. It's my nephew, by the way. But the more important thing is that this metadata is something that is, that takes up actually even a bit more room than you believe in the image. And in fact, EXIF data can take up about 14% on average of an image. So basically imagine you have a 100K image, 14K of it is more or less useless data. So that's something you actually want to remove as well. Now think about that on scale. You have like, I don't know, Amazon website with like 100 images, you know, and if they're not optimized right, you have like a bunch of data that's just useless. So that was a race through the formats. So ultimately, you must be thinking like, Henri, that's cool now, but what do I do with all this? Well, we're going to talk about this. What does it all mean? Leverage the strength of each format and the tools we have available to us, and we're going to go through some of that right now. Now, I'm not a Google advocate, and I'm saying that despite the fact that Alex Russell is going to be here tomorrow, but I would say certainly try to incorporate WebP into your image management solution, and I'll tell you why right now. So let's look at this mobile browser market share for this month, and this is worldwide, by the way. You can see right away there's a runaway winner, which is totally cool, and a few sort of like people trying to catch up, just trying. But if I take out the lack of support for WebP, so the 1 or 2 browsers who don't support WebP, this is what you end up with. So on a worldwide level, you can actually get some good data savings using the WebP because you have Chrome at the top, you have Samsung Internet in there, for sure. Yeah, no doubt. And a few others. But this is about 3/4 of the browsers on the planet right now. Now, there's one who's not listed, which is Mozilla, but they have a public bug, and they've been working on implementing WebP for the last like 1.5 years now. So they're going to be in the mix in a hot second. Something you want to consider. Real quick, we have the picture tag as well. Developers out there who are using picture source set, hands up, yes, no. Well, for the rest of you, you're about to right now as well. Now, I went and pulled this definition from MDM. Let's go. A responsive images method to control which image resource a user agent presents to a user based on resolution media query and or support for a particular image format. So basically, it's saying that depending on the user agent, the browser that comes through, you can feed it the best format possible. So if Chrome's come through, boom, you can hit them with the WebP. If Samsung Internet comes through, boom, you can hit them with the WebP. And this is a quick shot of what the code can look like, because we could expand that quickly. But essentially, just say Edge came through. Edge would get its own little JPEG XR. Just say, once again, Samsung Internet came through, they would get the WebP image. And these are things you can do to try to provide the most savings possible to some of your users. Now, things like lazy loading, that's something that you want to keep in your arsenal as well. Why do you want to do that? Well, on average, web pages, 66% of a page will be below the fold, on average. Well, here's another average. Only about 50% of users scroll down to the bottom. So if you're not lazy loading, you're essentially, it's essentially wasteful downloads. And these downloads are affecting data plans, et cetera, et cetera. Test on moderate to low-end and inexpensive devices. I mean, this was discussed earlier today. Caitlin, yeah, she may have talked about being in like South Africa and some of the cheap phones that are being used, and that's just like one area. This is happening all over the place, on a worldwide level. And in fact, companies are starting to address this by offering, brand new phones at about $150 price point, relatively stripped down features, but they work. You know what I mean? But these are phones that are accessible to audiences outside of North America, and much more affordable. Because we run into some of these challenges. Out-of-memory errors are very common in low-end devices, and the number one culprit is images. This is by a quote from an engineer well-known in the performance space, Ilya Grigorik. Things that you want to keep in mind. But here's another bombshell. The USA is the second largest market for low-end devices after India. So when you think you're developing, you're like, oh, whatever, I'm not really working with the, worldwide market, blah. Well, no, here's the reality. This is happening, and it's very true. Like, I'm not a rich dude. I have an iPhone 6. It's not a 6S, it's not a 7, or whatever they did after that, 8X. So I'm like a number of generations back, and there are some people who are a number of generations back of my device. So again, these are things you want to keep in mind. So some of the tools that we have available, and I'm a big fan of DevTools. If you're using a browser, you have DevTools, whether it be Firefox, and for developers, obviously, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera. And you could actually pick up some quick information from DevTools at all times. So in the case of Chrome, beyond the fact that, you know what, there's nothing I could do here, but the waterfall will indicate to you if something's taking a long time to load. One of the things about Chrome I like as well is that you can do some throttling, so you can do sort of like a synthetic testing and throttle the bandwidth down to like 3G, 2G to get a good feeling of what's happening there. And also, you'll be able to take a look at the page weight right down here to give you a quick check on what's happening. Another great tool is Chrome Lighthouse. Now, it's an extension that, it's an auditing tool that's part of Chrome, and it actually provides some very actionable insights once you do an audit. So this is a screenshot of an audit that I did of, Honda. But on an images level, it'll tell you there's some opportunities for savings here. And it'll say like, hey, you can go ahead and use some of these sort of like newer formats, obviously including WebP, but at the very least, better compression of PNG and JPEG, which is kind of true. But at the very least, you know that you can go back and see where you've potentially maybe forgotten to optimize or something was sized improperly. Now, another auditing tool that you'll probably hear about tomorrow morning is this one right here. Just, the speaker just happened to be in the room, so I just wanted to give him a shout out. Let's go. But no, this is, you'll be able to, they do a performance audit as well, and they specifically talk about images and the savings that might be possible. Now that's a savings level, but like I had mentioned, images can create a bit of a challenge, and some of the sort of like future areas that we're touching on, we'll be able to sort of like async and potentially defer some processing on the thread. And this may not specifically deal with page weight, but it does have to deal with some user experience issues that take place. But that's something you'll be able to sort of do some additional research if you wanted to, but I just want to throw that in. Even more issues or challenges that are going to be hopefully resolved. Some APIs are coming down the pipe, one like Intersection Observer, which is almost going to be essentially like embedded lazy loading into the browser. So you'll be able to sort of avoid some of these issues if you forget to use, say, a lazy loading library or whatnot. And there's some more auditing tools out there. One is very well known called Web Page Test, and they do specifically deal with some image auditing on that. We're using Web Page Test. So essentially, in almost a conclusion, when it comes down to, whoa, what just happened here? Well, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, one extra slide. I'm sorry. Always try to keep your page weight in mind, because again, the images are a bit of a low-hanging fruit, and it's always a little shocking when I see some images that are like, say, 4,000 pixels across being used as like a thumbnail, but these things are happening, and they're such an easy find when you just use DevTools or some of these linters that are available. So always keep that in mind, because at the end of the day, the experience of a large image on 2G will probably never get you a return user. I could literally guarantee that. And I have plenty of stories about that. If you want to hear them, I'll be more than happy to share them outside at the end. Plan your image strategy. Again, what is not a strategy is pulling images from the internet and just being like, okay, this is going to be perfect, and they're in your folder now, and you just use them as you please. This is happening too often. Know the format that you're using. If you're using like a ping for, I don't know, like a product shot, might be tough, because you might be able to do something better with a JPEG. These are kind of, some of the thoughts that you want to have in mind. Be kind to your users, like test, and you'll see what your users are going through. Get on that low-end device. Understand what it's like to try to access. Let me give you a quick example. You may or may not know, but there's a bunch of news sites out there that have light versions of their pages. CNN, for one. If you go to, I believe, cnnlight.io, you'll see like a page stripped of images and a lot of other content. So be kind to your users. Optimize as much as possible. as we know. Offload the work, use a CDN. I mean, some of the work that's being done around sort of like getting the right image and whatnot, yes, it can be a little tedious. Well, send it off to a CDN. People like Imagix, people like Cloudinary, and if you're balling out of control, people like Akamai. And ultimately, use the tools at your disposal. There are a lot of linters out there, and I'll be more than happy to share some as well. The ones that I'd mentioned, one we'll talk about tomorrow, and yeah, and ultimately, that's it. I'll be more than happy to take questions if you want, but we could do that outside too, so it's on you. Merci. I knew I forgot something. Hold on, credits. People to follow, I'll be able to tweet that out, you know, who are doing some kind of cool work in that space. I'm a son of educators, retired, so I like to prescribe homework. These are some great books you can read. Designing for Performance, Time is Money, Tammy Everts, Understanding Compression if you want to get into the weeds, which is totally cool. But this one's actually probably a must. This came out sometime last year, the year before. Awesome images, image sort of like engineer types. This is pretty much a complete book from A to Z that you'll be able to gain amazing insight from. And there are a couple here and there, but I think those four are pretty much the ones you want to stick with. That's it. Thank you.